Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
What the heck is a smart grid? Think of it as an electrical internet for your home. It could revolutionize our nation's electric system. We'll explain and take your questions. Join the conversation. Dialogue is next. Hello, I'm Joan Cartan Hansen. Thank you for joining us here on Idaho Public Television, on the World Wide Web, and on public radio stations. If you watched the Super Bowl back in January, you may have seen a commercial with a scarecrow bouncing on some electrical wires before heading off to Oz. The scarecrow was touting something called a smart grid. A smart grid is an integrated system that ties interactive appliances in your home to electric power lines, to utility companies, and to power providers. Each partner in the system can communicate with all the others. So, for example, when power demand is high, those smart appliances can turn off. Or when power demand is low, you can run your dryer and get a cheaper rate. A smart grid will allow for power conservation, leveling the peaks and valleys of the power load. That reduces the need for additional power plants and opens up opportunities for renewable sources like wind and solar. They sound like a fairy tale, but the federal government is about to invest in billions of dollars to upgrade the nation's electric grid. President Obama has called for the installation of 40 million smart meters in our homes and the building of an additional 3,000 miles of transmission lines. So what does this really mean for you? Joining me now to tell us more is Mike Wedall, Vice President of Energy Efficiency for the Bonneville Power Administration. Thank you, sir, for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's nice to be here, Joan.
And of course, we want to hear from you. Join the conversation. Give us a call, toll free at 1-800-973-9800. Well, let's backtrack a little bit before we talk about the smart grid. Tell us how the electrical grid system is set up. It's really not just one national system. It's 3,000 systems cobbled together.
Well, that's exactly right. We certainly have, some larger systems where the West is all hooked together, the East is hooked together, and then you have a third area down in Texas. But generally, you're right. It's a bunch of individual systems that sometimes talk to each other and sometimes don't interact very well. Take a look at that East Coast meltdown we had a few years ago.
So what do we want to change this to? What is a smart grid?
Well, I'd like to get a little bit more technical than your definition, but let's go, to something that I can explain to my 17-year-old son. And I just, again, quickly go to cell phones. Okay. That, years ago when Alexander Graham Bell developed the dial phone, he never envisioned that we were going to have all the things that we have today on a cell phone. But if you brought Thomas Edison back and you showed him the electric system of today, he would say, yeah, that's Pearl Street Station. That's the one I built in New York. So we literally have had no significant movement forward with a lot of the technologies that are available. And now we're ready to start to make those moves.
So what's the first step?
Well, the first step is going to depend upon where you are in the system. We still have a lot of testing that we need to do to figure out how these things are going to work. And one thing that people need to keep in mind is the smart grid in a place like Boise is very different than a rural area in Idaho. And so what the utility company, the electric needs are in an urban environment, again, will be different than what people build out in the rural areas. For example, where solar is very big and you can start to integrate that into the system, to maybe, firm up some wind when the wind's not blowing. That wouldn't work, in areas, where I come from, say Portland, Oregon, where the sun, doesn't always come out during the winter. So, what we want to do is find the right mix of measures, and that's actually one of the things that we're doing right now in the Northwest is figuring out what we can do with test utilities.
Well, let's jump to the future. Part of the smart grid is having a smart house and a smart car. We have a graphic that we have from the BPA that kind of shows what that smart house was going to look like. It's going to have electric chips in various communications that work with, like the internet, right, that you can check for your car. It's a hybrid plug-in car. There's real pricing on your electric system,
be.
smart thermostats so
Right.
that you can keep track of devices. You can interact with your utility on your cell phone or your computer, on your laptop, and all connected together through those power lines.
Exactly.
And then there's something called a smart meter. What's a smart meter?
Well, there are different meters that are being tested right now, but basically, rather than just something that measures how much electricity goes into your home and is consumed, this would be able to measure that and then report out, to perhaps the utility that something might be wrong at your house, that consumption is way out of line, and also it might tell you, on a real-time basis that, hey, my bill is going to be much higher this month, and look around and find out that somebody's been playing with the thermostat, and maybe it's been left on when you're away during the day. So it's going to give a lot more power and information to both consumers as well as your electric company to help us really optimize the electric system.
Is that the key here, is to be able to eliminate the peaks and valleys of power consumption?
That's one of the significant benefits. Certainly people know that electricity is the one commodity that we can't store, or when we store it, we have very limited storage capability and it's very expensive. Hopefully that's going to get better in the future. But right now, yeah, we've got to have consumption, we've got to have, production ready for the highest point during the day, and that's very limited, time. What if we could delay the start of your dishwasher? What if we could, with your agreement, say we're not going to reheat the water in the hot water tank until 2 hours after you've left home when the peak has dropped? These are things that are highly doable and again would have significant benefits, to our country.
And in exchange for delaying my water heater for a couple of hours, I'm not charged as much for the power? Could be.
These are things, again, we have to test because, some people are willing to do this right now. Other people, they want a price signal. And, still others, we may find other incentives, that will get them to want to participate.
Is bottoming out and shallowing out those valleys and peaks, making a pretty consistent picture, why does that open it up for renewable resources like wind and solar? Why is that opening those opportunities for renewable resources?
Well, certainly right now, if you just take wind as an example, we can't always count on it. There are certain times where the wind just literally stops blowing. We've got well over 1,000 megawatts of wind on our system, and much to our surprise, last year the wind stopped blowing for 2 weeks. Literally for 2 weeks, and we were scrambling because we have to replace that. If we had things like smart houses, smart garages, electric cars that might put some electricity back in the system, certainly they wouldn't carry us for 2 weeks. But when it stops blowing for 2 hours, these are things that again could lower the demand, means we don't have to turn on more expensive, potentially highly polluting power plants.
I guess that's the other question. Why does this help reduce the carbon? Why does the smart grid reduce our carbon footprint?
Well, certainly everything we can do to make the resources that we have as efficient as possible are just going to benefit the, our whole environmental challenge that we have in front of us. And so, energy efficiency and, the smart grid and its contribution to energy efficiency, it's got to be the very first step towards meeting the carbon challenge.
Well, we had a couple of email questions come in, so let me get to one. Let's see if we've got any phone. Let's go to our first caller. Let's get Nick in Roberts. Nick.
Hello.
Hi there.
I've been trying to turn my farm into a solar system for a while now. Okay, and Rocky Mountain Power says because I would have to generate so much power on a return when my irrigation pumps aren't running that I can't tie into the existing system. I have to wait for the smart grid. Now, when is it going to start affecting Idaho to where people like me who are interested in saving $18,000 every 3 months in electric costs going to be able to take advantage of these things?
Okay, good question.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to happen, Nick. It's going to vary around the country. One of the things I do want to emphasize is, the smart grid right now is a concept of many options. As I mentioned before, it's going to be different in different parts of the country, and we need to figure out exactly how these things are going to work together. And some utilities are going to, be more on the forefront, on the cutting edge, willing to take some of these risks to make these things happen. So all I guess I can say is, keep talking to your legislators, keep talking to your utility company and telling them, I want to be part of this.
The Idaho Public Utilities Commission is expected to announce as early as tomorrow funding for in a power increase rate that's been requested by Idaho Power, one of the power companies that serves Idaho, money for smart meters.
Good. And
incentives for smart meters. So there's some steps, but at this point it's coming from regulators, not from the power companies. Bonneville Power Administration is obviously, you're not the power companies, you oversee it. Within the Bonneville Power Administration system, how many power companies are actually kind of moving in this direction?
Well, right now, we provide power to over 135 utilities in the Northwest. And we recently put out a request for participation in doing a first round of demonstration. We got 31 proposals, and these are 31 utilities, public and private, from around the region that have said they're willing to financially contribute to doing the type of demonstrations that would move this all along. So you're seeing growing interest as people not just being willing to talk about it, but also to start to make the investments to test how it's going to work.
Any of those 31 in Idaho?
Yes, they are.
Can you tell us which ones?
I don't think I should.
Oh, okay. Well, it's
Right.
still the present.
Yeah.
Now, as part of President Obama's stimulus package, there's a lot of money going for smart grid. What's going to happen with that?
Well, there's two major pots available for the smart grid, Joan. One is Section 1306, which provides over $3 billion to put more smart meters and infrastructure in. But the pot that we're most interested in is what's called 1304, where they've set aside a little over $600 million to do the type of demonstrations and testing that needs to be done. And actually, the 31 utilities that I referred to who've applied to participate as partners, we want to do under that section of the stimulus funds.
Okay. Well, let's go to, let's see, I think it's John. John in Idaho Falls. John.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Now, are we talking about tying the whole country together in one big grid? And if so, does that mean if one power plant or transmission line goes down, the whole country goes down?
Okay.
Yep. Well, actually, no. We're not talking about tying the whole country together. We have three major parts of the country that are hooked together, that we talked about a moment ago. And actually, if you think about the smart grid, because it's not just in homes or in businesses, it's also, on the distribution system, it's also on the transmission system, and it's at power generation sites. And, someone has pointed out in, several bits of research that if you take that East Coast meltdown from a few years ago that started with one small utility and cascaded throughout the whole East Coast, that if the technology that we know about today was in place, that wouldn't have happened, that we would have been able to stop it, that sensors on the transmission system, at the distribution system, et cetera, would have picked up these anomalies and would have cut things off before they cascaded.
Is it going to be, we had one email question from Patty wanting to know, let me read it. Won't having all the different localized smart grids plans just lead to the same jumble we have now with the grid infrastructure?
Well, I have to say, I'm sure it's a jumble, for those who are sitting on the other side of the table. For people like myself who are trying to figure out how do we make the system and the resources as efficient and effective and go as far while having the smallest carbon footprint, no, it just gives us more tools. And, just like anything, I imagine the first time we all use TurboTax or some software like that, it's confusing. Once you get the hang of it, all of a sudden it's like, how in the heck did I get along without this?
But every state has its own utility regulation system of some sort. How do you bring all that in line with the smart grid?
Well, that's where we really need national standards. And one of the first things the Obama administration is emphasizing is a push on setting up those standards. For example, if you take the type of meters that you talked about a moment ago, Joan, well, we need those meters to be able to talk to each other, and that we all know what the protocols are, so that when new technologies come along, because there's going to be more on the cell phone, and there's going to be more that keeps coming, we need to be able to plug that in and not worry about, well, geez, this is a proprietary system.
So no VHS beta war going on.
We need to really avoid that.
Okay, let's go to, I think it's Dave in Worley. Dave.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Dave.
My question is, how much of this is for energy conservation as in compared to information gathering by the government?
How much
Control.
of it? Do that question for me one more time.
The smart grid is reporting meters, reporting appliances, chips and appliances. I mean, how much of this has to do with energy conservation as in, or in information gathering?
Okay, I think I got you.
Control?
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is information certainly is power. And if the utility knows more about what's going on in their system, they're going to be able to proactively take actions. So the example again I used, back east, if the utility knew something was going wrong with these substations, then they would have been able to island that and to control it. So certainly the whole security, privacy issue is very important, and it's something that we in the utility industry need to take extremely seriously. But again, for a person like myself who's now been working on the demand side, energy efficiency, conservation for 30 years, it's a whole new set of tools to be able to, get people to be even more efficient. I don't think any of us really like just throwing our money away. And if I could just have somebody come in and know that I haven't been in the house for a couple of days, and to automatically turn down the thermostat that we left on while we went away on vacation, I would love that.
But there are people who are really going to be concerned about the government knowing that I own this kind of appliance, or that I don't want to run this sort of operation. Right,
and certainly from my perspective, one of the things we need to be able to do is give people the opportunity to opt out. That if they don't want to be part of this, they don't want to have someone helping to manage the efficiency of their system, then people should have that freedom. But I think what you're going to find is that there's just a lot of people who are willing to say, help me, because that's what it is, help me.
How about for the poor? Quite often we set up have and have nots. That I don't have the money to buy a laptop, or I live in a rural part of the state and I don't have a great internet connection. Is that setting up a system of have and have nots in terms of we're on the smart grid and they're not going to be on the smart grid?
Well, I think, if you think about it from, the side of the table where I'm sitting on, it's the system together, because typically, you may have concentrations, maybe there's housing developments, et cetera, but, the electric system usually doesn't specifically serve low income. And so, if I want to maximize the efficiency of the whole grid, I'm taking, everybody together. There may be certain parts I want to service first, some of the older parts of the system that need to be upgraded. But generally, I'd like to think, no, we need to be attacking this as a holistic issue.
Sharon sent an email in and wants to know, will this be turning people's backyards into crisscrossing transmission lines?
Well, I hope not. I don't want that in my backyard, and I don't think, that other people, want that. Ultimately, to me, the smart grid is ways that we're going to start to see fewer power lines, because if you can make the system much more efficient, then we're not going to have to generate as much down the road. This isn't to say that we can, obviate or avoid all transmission. I mean, electric, demand is growing, tremendously. And, so we're always going to need more electricity. But to make sure it's as efficient as possible and make sure that we're only building the lines that are absolutely necessary, the smart grid is, going to be a great tool.
Let's go to Carolyn in Twin Falls. Carolyn?
Yes, well, I believe in conservation, and I'm wondering why the contractors in the United States have never gone to the hot water heaters that are individually in the bathrooms and in the kitchen where you need them, rather than heating up a 40 or 60 gallon tank of water every day when it's really not in use.
It's a good question. And are we going to see requirements for smart appliances?
Well, I think again, what it's going to be is a localized, design as to what's appropriate. That's a real good point. Is that for some instances, having a flash water heater is much more effective. I can't speak as to why a certain builder might decide to put something in, but it may be a question that as we all look forward at a retrofit, you may want to at least ask the question, see if it fits. But even, we've got new technologies that are coming with hot water. For example, hot water heat pumps, where, you know, the same efficient, you know, heat exchange technology is now going to be available to heat our water at a much lower cost. But one of the things you get when you heat the water is cool air. And if you've got your hot water heater in a conditioned space, you don't want a lot of, you know, air-conditioned air, you know, coming in, you know, in the middle of January. And so again, I just throw that out as an example of there's different technologies that'll make sense for different parts of the country.
So someone told me that a smart grid is not really a technology as much as it is a vision, because it's changing little changes in everything we do. Is that an accurate picture?
I would agree. I mean, the first thing is, I always tell people, if you got 10 people in the room, 10 utility people like myself, and you said, write down a definition of smart grid, you'd come up with 12 definitions. And so, you know, we're evolving as we, you know, figure this out. And it really is, again, something that needs to be tailored to individuals.
Let's go to Dean in Chubbuck. Dean.
Yeah, an observation as a customer. I don't think that Idaho Power is, I mean, they're more or less a cost-plus basis here, obviously. When he's got $1 million windmills sitting there idle and all the rest of it, somebody's paying for that, and I have a suspicion that's going to be eventually transferred to the customer. Also, there's a potential for several low-head hydro sites and a constant flow in the summertime between American Falls and Lake Walcott. And surely a lot of us would like to see that develop because it'll coincide with the peak use by the farmers in their irrigation. But whatever, I just don't think Idaho Power really is taking, and we enjoy their rates, don't get me wrong, but I see them inviting all this federal regulation and all the rest of it to end up turning around and jabbing their consumers with it.
Well, that's actually leads me to a good question before I sneeze here, is that we in the Northwest have extremely low power rates compared to much of the nation.
Exactly.
My fear is if we go to a smart grid, our rates are going to go up, because that's the only way they can go. Is how are we in the Northwest going to keep our nice cheap power that we like?
Well, you know, we are very lucky to have the hydro system here as a crown jewel, and for us to have you know, that benefit as a, you know, nice foundation for those cheap rates. You know, I'd like to think, again, as you optimize the system, you're going to do better controlling rates. If we don't have to build those power plants, I go back to, again, to my, you know, legacy of 30 years in energy efficiency. It is always much more efficient to conserve that kilowatt hour than it is to any kind of generation of a kilowatt hour.
Oh, let me go to Casey in King Hill. Casey. Go ahead. Casey, are you there?
Yeah, I was wondering, what can the individual person, yes, yeah?
Go ahead.
Okay. Do to encourage the, what can the individual person do to encourage the use of the...
Go ahead, just kind of speed up the process. There we go, we'll go with that. Thanks, Casey. Yeah. So what can the individual person do to kind of push technology and push the smart grid along? Well,
you know, certainly to the degree that people can talk to, you know, their utility company, to, you know, go to meetings, or to, send them an email, or to, you know, talk to the regulators and, you know, tell them that you're interested in, you know, the benefits that come your way. And at the same time, you know, there are things we can do today, you know, with standard energy efficiency, and we should all be, you know, first looking there, because, you know, every kilowatt hour we save lowers our own bills, and we get the savings of that. And, you know, there's just so many cost-effective things we can do in our homes and businesses.
You know, and we'll talk about that with our Dialogue Web Extra. So if you're on the phone and don't get to your call, stay with me. We'll get you on the other side when we do our Web Extra, and then we'll talk about energy conservation in our Web Extra program. We've got just a little bit of question. I want to get a couple more emails that we got in. Let's see. Cindy wanted to know, how does smart grid fit in with renewable energy? There's the idea with a smart grid that there'll be home power plants. You may have a power plant in your neighborhood or your home that may not cover all your energy, but will start feeding that system back in, because the smart grid system can take energy back in when you need it, as opposed to just putting it out.
Well,
are we going to see that in the future?
That's certainly one configuration. You know, let's just take a neighborhood that might be at the end of a long line, far away from a you know, generating station, and there's line losses getting that power out there. it could actually make sense to create a little microgrid for that community at the end of the line, increase their reliability, have not just one source of their power, and it can be again configured to the needs of that neighborhood. So the thing again that's beautiful or extremely exciting about the smart grid is it's what fits the needs of that community, of that housing development, of that business, of that government campus or school campus.
Is this going to become like my phone bill, and I have to find this service here and this service here, and I have to figure all this stuff out? The one advantage of Ma Bell was there was just one phone bill.
Yeah, yeah.
Is this what the power is going to come to?
I'd like to think we could learn some things from the telephone company and the telephone experience. While certainly we've all gotten a lot of benefit from watching the change, it's been painful at times. And I'm sure we'll have our bumps in the electric utility industry, but to start to get that kind of individual line item bill, oh, please no.
Well, good. At least one of you knows this problem. Let me end up, because we're rapidly running out of time, I want to have you explain if there's one or two things you want people to remember about the smart grid as this technology rolls out. What would that be?
Well, I think, again, I'm going to go back to, first of all, you don't have to wait for the smart grid. There's things you can do today to, optimize your situation at home or your business, and so reach out, find the right resources to do that, because, if you don't, you're just, not taking advantage and not optimizing your own situation. And then, watch the way the smart grid rolls out, ask questions of our leaders and, the people that are doing this, and find out what it's going to take to start to bring some of these experiments, because we're going to have to experiment, we're going to have to skin our knees, before we have the great successes.
When are we going to see those first this next wave of pilot projects?
Well, we're putting together an application for stimulus funds that we expect will be within the next 2 months, and we're hoping that we'll get a nice award, a 50% match to a significant investment that utilities, including ours, are going to make to putting these demonstrations together. And so within 1 to 2 years, we should be seeing, these systems starting to work on, individual lines and individual neighborhoods.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate you being here. We've run out of time.
Fun.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming all the way from Portland for us.
Thank you.
And we want to appreciate you for joining us. If you want to learn more about the smart grid, go to Dialogue's website at idahoptv.org. You'll find links and our web extra conversation about energy efficiency. And by the way, we're now on Facebook, so you can search Dialogue on Idaho Public Television and become a fan. Thanks for tuning in, and join us here next time for Dialogue.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. To order a copy of this program from Idaho Public Television, call our toll-free number or visit us on the World Wide Web.